Good morning, everyone. My name is Julinda Ladie, co-producer for Beautiful Black Books, presented by Poetry Center San Jose, with our fabulous host, Santa Clara Poet Laureate Tshaka Campbell. And our featuring poet today is Ashia Ajani. Before we get started, we would like to acknowledge the city of San Jose exists on unceded land of the Mwakama Ohlone. We recognize the right the Ohlone people have to this land, which they have stewarded throughout the generations. We acknowledge that this land has come under control of various entities through violence, dishonesty. We recognize the history, the legacy of colonialism that impacted the indigenous peoples, their traditional territories and practices. We acknowledge that every member of the San Jose community continues to benefit from the occupation of this land. We recognize the Mwakama Ohlone people are alive and flourishing members of the community today. Let us take a moment of silence to pay respect to our elders and all the Ohlone people of the past and the present. Thank you. Now let me introduce our guest and our host for the program. Today we have Ashia Ajani. They are a soul-stained child of Denver, Colorado. Ajani is drawn to poetry as a way to make sense of the decay and promise of future embodies. Ajani's works have been featured in Atmos Sierra, World Literature Today, Split Lip Magazine, and Frontier Poetry, among others. Ajani is a small fiction award recipient and has received fellowships with the Buffalo Literary Center, Tin House, and the Watering Hole. You can find more about Ajani in our chat section. They are also a facilitator and workshops for reading for Vox Media, Fernland Studios, and winner of the 2002 Write Bloody Publishing Jack McCarthy Book Prize. Learn more about Ajani in our chat. Now for our amazing hosts. Our Santa Clara Poet Laureate Tshaka Campbell has been featured in 4 books of poetry, an internationally recognized artist and performer. He has won Grand Slam championships around the city, the US. And he would just like everyone to remember and ask, he continues to ask the world to listen more. Now let me please introduce Tshaka and our guest, Ashia Ajani.
Hello. Thank you, Jalinda. Ashia, I'm so happy and so blessed to have you in our seat. I've heard so much about you. We haven't had a chance to sort of, meet or talk face to face. So this is definitely a pleasure for me. For those who are on the call, just so you know, Jalinda talked a bit about who we are, in Poetry Center San Jose and such, but Beautiful Black Books specifically is really a space that we created to make room to have chats, sort of what do you call it, fireside chat with our artists. We don't often get a chance after they perform to really understand sort of what drives our poets, and what drives their art. So it's an opportunity for us to sort of bring Black artists to the community and to bring the community to these artists. So happy you can join us now, or if you tune in later on, that'd be great and wonderful. We're just going to jump right in, if that's all right. So
absolutely.
First one, just give a snapshot. Where are you hailing from right now? Where are you talking to us from?
Yeah, so I'm currently talking to y'all from Oakland, California, but I'm originally from Denver, Colorado. That's where I was born and raised. But I have been in Oakland kind of like back and forth, or well, more kind of like generally the Bay Area, back and forth for the past couple of years, research, school, job, and definitely consider Oakland home now.
Oh, nice. That's nice. So, when you read your bio, you see author, you see poet, you see educator. But specifically, there's an environmental educator. Tell us a little bit more about like what this is and how you define that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was younger, growing up in Denver, especially, there was a lot of mix of like urban and outdoor. So I lived in like a city neighborhood, but I got to do a lot of outdoor stuff. I played a lot outdoors. I was an only child, so I a lot of imagination around the outdoors and like building and entertaining myself. And being outside was really where I felt like the most grounded and the most comfortable and the most free. As I got older, I recognized that, being Black, being outdoors, there's like a lot of levels to it. There's a lot of layers to it. There's a lot of really intense history around being Black and outside. And there's like this very pervasive, I think a lot of it is kind of changing now, but I feel like there's a pervasive notion that Black folks don't enjoy being outside or that they don't enjoy the outdoors. Which in my experience has been pretty false. It's actually been that the outdoors has been made unsafe in a lot of ways for Black folks. And so as an educator, as an environmental educator, my approach is to think about the rich history that Black folks have of environmental stewardship, of being outdoors, of being one with nature, but also recognizing some of the terror and the really intense trauma that comes with being outside and being perceived as not being Black outdoors, but being perceived by whiteness, as Black outdoors. And so my job as an educator, at least right now, is to think about this history and help build a future in which, Black children, Black folks, Black elders feel a lot more comfortable being outside, recognize that history, and also have the tools to empower themselves to, help pass on this lineage, this long lineage of environmental stewardship in the Western Hemisphere, as I think of it.
Yeah, that's incredible because there's two things that you said there that just hit home for me. First was just saying, we're talking about just being out in nature and people's perception of nature. I grew up, in London and then in New York City. So my perception of nature, they call it the concrete jungle, right? So our parks were concrete, et cetera, et cetera. But that being said, maybe it's just for me, this idea of feeling, that, the idea of unsafe outside was it was just, that was known already. But that was the thing that we thought of when we were going outside, because that's what if you're in the projects in Brooklyn, you got to go outside to breathe. And so it has a whole different relationship than when you come and then you move to California, where it's just like, oh my God, there's so much space. Even in COVID, you would look and see folks that are living in places like New York City, three folks living in a 2-bedroom in New York City, having to not stay inside. What did they call it? Something in shelter. God, I forgot it.
Shelter in place.
Yeah, shelter in place. But here, you could theoretically shelter in place, but still go to the park and walk through the trail. So it's just that I guess what makes it even worse now is that dichotomy of saying, well, look at all that room, and now in that space, feeling unsafe in all this massive expanse. So just that idea of it started making me think of all sorts of not only parallel things, but things that are just I guess what's the word I'm looking for? The antithesis of, So, again, you said that living in Denver is sort of where this focus on the environment sort of came to. How did then poetry come into that? How did that storytelling come about?
Yeah, so my mom had a big hand in it, really, because I was an only child, I didn't have siblings. I kind of grew up with my cousins, we would spend the summer together here and there. But I was alone a lot. And so I ended up having to write a lot or read a lot as a mode of communication, as a mode of self-expression. It was very different, of course, when I was in school, but because my mom worked a lot, I was usually like, it was like me and my grandma would be out in the garden, you know, and I would be like helping her. And then when like grandma went to go lay down, I was like, okay, well, I have all this time, you know, how am I gonna, and I have all these ideas, you know, who am I gonna communicate them to? So the page really was the way for me to communicate those ideas and process some of the things that were going on in my mind. And I always loved, I'm a Gemini. I say this kind of like cheekily, but like I'm a Gemini, so I've always loved talking. I've always had like gift of gab. And I think that translated very well into the page and into kind of like this radical imaginary of, yeah, the trees are my friends, like we talk to each other, or like, yes, like I see this bird outside of my window and I can come up with an entire backstory for this bird and why like they're outside my window now, and maybe they're lost, or maybe they want to come back, or how can I make this habitat more engaging and like show my appreciation to them. And so I just always really loved thinking expansively about like, you know, we immediately see something, right? And I have a poem in one of my books that kind of talks about this. We see the thing that's in front of us, right? But we feel it as well. And sometimes the feeling that we have is much more intense or much more expansive than just what isn't immediately in our sightline. So that's why I say when I like see like a tree, I don't just see like, you know, like the leaves, I don't just see like the wood and like, you know, the physical nature of it. I see like, well, where did this tree come from? Like, why is it here now? What would happen when it's gone? Like, that's just kind of how my mind works. And I mean, there's so many plants, especially in the Bay Area too. Like when you really look into the environmental history of the Bay Area, even though it's so green and it's so lush, so much of this stuff is built up. So much of the stuff has been imported from elsewhere. And then, you know, you have the issue of invasive species, you have the issue of climate change. And then again, you know, as you start to realize these things, you're not just looking at like a cactus, you're not just looking at like an at a vacant lot, like you're looking at like history kind of enduring.
Yeah, that's amazing. I never thought of it that way. I remember I was blown away when I first found out that palm trees weren't like indigenous. Oh, that is not even
everywhere.
Yeah, it's not even a tree. It's like some sort of I don't know, but yeah, no, it's incredible when you look at it in that sense and just in the building on top of what was already here. So you said you know you're kind of like a storyteller. You create these you create these stories, which I love, and similar. I don't know if it's the same with you, but I know when I watch movies and then they end and I'm like, but wait, there's so much more that I thought about it. But with all of that, sort of, how did that become, you decide to say, okay, now I'm going to share this with the world. I'm going to share this with other people, right? Because we write, and I mean, God, I was writing for 10, 15 years for myself, right? And nothing else until I went to a spot and was like, oh, wow. People do this, you know what I mean? So what was that sort of that click for you where you said, okay, now I want to share this and I want to do this work outside?
Yeah, totally. So I mean, at least in terms of storytelling and in terms of poetry, I did grow up in the slam scene. So I started as a youth poet in high school. I started, I think, my junior year. I was like writing poetry. I didn't really know, like, I didn't have a name for it. I didn't really know like what slam was until actually like one of my teachers, my high school English teacher, we did like a brief unit on poetry and she wanted to show us a bunch of different forms of poetry. And so she showed us a performance poem and I was like, oh, whoa, like this is kind of like what I have envisioned doing, but I didn't really have like a name for it. And then funny enough, she was like, yeah, you know, like one of the reasons why I wanted to show this to the class, because I know that like this is probably something you'd be interested in. And actually, I signed you up for a slam tonight if you can make it, if you want to go. So,
oh, by the way.
Yeah. Which like actually was probably like the best thing that she could have done for me. I think I needed a little kick in the butt to kind of like take it from like page to the stage. I've always been like really chatty. I've really been like I've been very opinionated. And slam was like definitely a way to kind of like get out some of that like frustration that, you know, like teen angst, but also mixed with like, I think especially too, you know, as a teenager, when you talk about things, and like especially when you talk about issues like of injustice or like social justice, people are just kind of like, well, you 15, you don't really you don't even know anything about that. And it's like so dismissive, of our youth who are like enduring and experiencing these things. And so slam was a really great way for me to be like, oh no, you are seen, you are heard, you are able to like express which, and and we're feeling it with you. So that was kind of like how I made that transition. And then I was performing a lot, and I was like, oh wow, I really do enjoy this. And I did miss, I always wanted to write. I knew that I like really loved writing. I always loved reading, I always loved writing, I loved communicating. And so I think it was kind of a natural progression after doing like slam stuff to college. And then and then I did my master's is actually like in environmental education. But I do find like curriculum writing as a form of like poetry, almost as a form of storytelling, especially as I think about like the type of curriculum that I like to put forward. It's not like kind of like standard, oh, here's like 10th grade history, here's like like 11th grade math. It's like, oh well, like if we're talking about environment, what are the different ways that we can make place-based or local education, and a lot of that is like storytelling.
Yeah. So how do you get, two questions in that, like how do you get an audience, and depending on who you're speaking to, I'm sure it's different if you're talking to high school students or you're talking to college students, but how do you get them in sort of, for lack of a better word, in tune with nature or what they've forgotten?
Yeah. I think I'm still figuring that out. It's different with every class that I work with. For high schoolers, especially, I think one thing that's nice is the school that I work at is that there is an expectation that we are going to go outside. If you sign up for the class, you know that you're going to go outside. So at least you're like mentally prepared. Even if you're like a high schooler who tends to be a little bit more like, oh, I'd rather just like, either sit on my phone or like play my video games or be inside and hang out. Well, I know at least like there is an expectation that I'm going to be outside for a certain number of hours. And even if I'm not with it, like I know that that's going to happen. But for a lot of them, because they spend so much time inside in a classroom, just like staring at a board, listening to a teacher, being outside is really great. Like they get to be like freer. They get to like experiment. They get to like, especially because we're doing garden education, they get to grow things. And then later we get to cook things, that they grew, which is really fun. And so, I think like connecting it to really tactile and like hands-on, like, wow, this is what you can do. This is what you can grow. And like that sense of pride too, like, look, I grew this, like, like people get like really excited to see, but also like recognizing a garden is like kind of a mean teacher, like especially recently because of all the storms that we had, like those were unforeseen. So a lot of our seeds got washed away, seedlings got washed away, things get eaten because we're not doing any like pesticides or insecticides or anything, and we're trying to do everything natural. It's also at the school site, so sometimes, and that's the purpose of the garden, but people will like take things a little bit earlier than they're supposed to, so it's like a good kind of like, I think that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is recognizing like the cultural element too. There are some students who are like, again, that pervasive notion of like, like some black folks don't really like being out in nature. Or like, if I'm working with predominantly Latin students, like a lot of trauma, can come up for it because, legacies of like exploited labor and farm work and things like that. And so we talk about those things, and we talk about how, a lot of this is our birthright, but not in the way that like capitalism and sort of like Western like forced labor has made it. Like a lot of this stuff would not be possible without us. A lot of the things that we know how to grow, a lot of indigenous wisdom, a lot of knowledge is inaccessible or was inaccessible to us. And now we're reclaiming it. So those are like, two schools of thought.
Yeah, no, I love that. It brings me to, there's I think it's Padma Lakshmi that does a show called Taste of the Nation, and it's just so incredible when you realize how much of the culture, the identity is tied into the foods we eat, which of course are representative of the areas we're in and land and all of that kind of stuff. And it's just incredible once you start to grasp it. And I think more than anything else, like the connections, like there's so many like aha moments where you're like, oh, so that's why. Or fried bread was not actually I mean, it was, yes, it's a cultural thing, but it was because they were only given bread. You know what I mean? And you start piecing these things together, and things that you understand as just normal. Now you can sort of unpack it. So the work you do is so incredibly important, and thank you for that. So, you know, for folks watching watching right now, or as I said before, a lot of what you'll get is this sort of after viewership on this program. How would you recommend that how would you suggest that they turn their passions into writing? You know what I mean? Because it's like, okay, I love the environment, and then there's poetry or whatever that thing is over here. How do you even know, to blend that together and then to work for them?
Yeah. I mean, well, to be perfectly honest, a lot of them were separate before I started like pulling them together. I didn't really start pulling stuff together really until college, like kind of like towards the end of college, because I love poetry and I love writing, but my mom was like very candid and like, you're not gonna be able to make a career out of this. Like, like it's hard, like, it's hard out here, like for writers and for creatives. So I did go a little bit more of like the scientific route, just so that, just with job security, in terms of that. But
it's real,
yeah. But then I got really lucky in that, like, I feel, and I think also like a lot of like really dope Black creatives, there's this newfound, at least for my like passion, there's like this really newfound interest, I think, considering the time that we're in terms of climate crises, there's this newfound interest and curiosity. I would say despair, anxiety, dread, all of these different feelings about like climate and the environment. And so I'm in a very particular niche in that like a lot of people want to learn, a lot of people are curious. A lot of people want to know more about like, why are we in the situation that we're in and where are we going? And then I also think like, a lot of folks too are kind of really tired of like the dystopia thing. It's as we move further and further to like, like Parable of the Sower was like kind of like a prophecy, like as we kind of move closer to that, people are like, well, okay, great. Like we're nearing the edge of that. Like, how do we either work through it or how do we build something different?
Right.
I think that that's kind of like how I've been able to make a pathway for myself, is because I have like, like I have the tools and I have the interest and I have the knowledge. And I also am very lucky that I have like ancestral wisdom from my family that has been passed down to me in terms of thinking about issues of environment and also communicating it too. I think usually what happens is folks, and I think that these are very necessary. And I have a lot of friends who are climate scientists, but folks will like put up a graph, or they'll say like, here are these numbers. We have this much time before we're 2 degrees Celsius over where we should be. Right. For a lot of people that, that's like, okay, like, like,
it's hot. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know what you want me to do with that, and so I think the storytelling aspect comes in of like, well, no, and you've experienced this, like, you experience what that means. You experience like not being able to be comfortable without air conditioning. Like, what it means to like try and garden, and then like the next day, like all of your stuff is dead in the garden, and that's never happened before. So you've experienced these things, and what that kind of even if you are seeing the graphs, and the graphs seem very abstract, it is very like localized and on the ground. And I think that even like thinking outside of environment, when you're talking about communications, like making that personal connection and making those observations are super, super powerful. Whether you are like, if your passion is art, or if your passion is like pottery, if your passion is accessible transit, like like all sorts of things. Like if you're able to, I think, like make that personal connection and have those like really like sobering observations, that's what's like really compelling. That's what I like in writing.
Yeah. So how do we get this? How do we imbue the power to make this change? And I know that's a crazy hard question, right? But is it a collective consciousness thing? We talk about this enough, and there's going to hit a point where it's just like, okay, everyone gets it. But that's the thing that I challenge with, is I see some of this work, and I'm like, that's great, but nobody here who's making the decisions is in that same space. What are your thoughts on that?
Ooh, that's something that I think about a lot. That's something that a lot of my students ask, because like we do this activity. It's like supposed to be more kind of like, whoa, like this is how we live. It's like called your carbon footprint calculator. And it's very individual. And it's like, okay, let's say if everybody on the planet lived like you live, and it goes through like your habit, your routine, like your transit, like consumption, like all that. How many planets will we need for like a calendar year? And so sometimes they're like, okay, thank you for doing this. This is like fun to kind of see, but like also like, what's the point of it? Like, what that got to do with me? Like, you know, like I'm just like living the way that I know how to live. Like I have to take BART. Like, you know, like my mom does drive me to school because like we live so far out that we don't have accessible public transit. You know, like how, like, what do you want me to do about it? And I completely like understand that because I oftentimes exist in that realm too. But one of my favorite scientists, and they're like called crypto naturalist on Instagram. Okay. And I think they're actually coming out with a book shortly. But they said something to the tune of like doing the best that you can with the things that are available to you matters more than anything. Yeah. So working through kind of like that despair that, oh, I don't see anybody else doing things. Oh, this is completely out of my control. Well, what are some things that are in your control? You know, can you potentially take like less Ubers or less like cars? Can you like limit kind of like water consumption? Can you talk to your friends about like, you know, like gardening? Are there skills that you want to share? And then another person who I love, Isaiah Powell out of Dragon Spunk in Bayview, Hunter's Point. He's worked with like Ron Finley, who's the guerrilla gardener based out in LA. Yeah. And like one of my favorite things that they say that's really empowered me is like, let's like, sorry for the expletive, but like, let's just like do shit. Like, let's just plant shit. Like, you know, like
all you want.
Yeah. like let's just plant shit. Like, you know, like let's just like do shit. It's gonna fail. Sometimes it's gonna like suck. Sometimes it's not gonna come out the way that you want it to. But I think a lot of times folks are like looking for some wide big solution. And yes, it would be great if like we stopped using fossil fuels tomorrow. Like that's really the big change that needs to, like, you know, that could do so much. Even if we don't do any of the other stuff, like that could do so much. But that ain't happening tomorrow, you know. So what are the things that you can do? What are the skills that you can acquire? Like what shit can you do now? You know, that's going to enrich your life and, you know, and enrich like future generations' lives too.
Yeah, no, you make good point. You know, it's funny because I just got a text message from my dad with a picture of like, he just grew like 40 pounds of tomatoes in the backyard. And so he's just like, I don't know what to do with all these tomatoes. And I'm like, well, pass them out to folks in the neighborhood, you know? And so to your point of like those little things that you can do, at least that's one or two less packages of folks that's something that they're gonna go buy. I love it. I love it. Let me jump into this. So there's a review of an anthology called Black Nature. Baltimore Sun, Camille Dungy talks a lot about Black nature and such. There, and it said Camille Dungy believes that white and Black poets look differently at nature, with white primarily noticing its beauty and Black seeing its harshness. The view is intensified by the Black experience of slavery. What comes to your mind when you hear that? Yeah, I mean, truth. You know, I definitely think that we are, okay, hold on, I'm gonna back up. So there's this author who I really love. Her name is Kimberly Ruffin, and she wrote Black on Earth. It's like a analysis of African-American eco-literary traditions. And she put forth this concept of this beauty and burden paradox, which is that Black folks in particular, we enjoy nature, we love nature. I remember trips to like the park, like we set up our grill, we'd hang out, we'd like put on some music, have a good time. But then at the back of our heads, we're always like, well, are the cops gonna come? Like, is anybody gonna like harass us? Is this X, Y, and Z? So I think that that's like a more kind of like, I guess, contemporary example of this beauty and burden paradox. We enjoy things, we love being out there, but there's always that sort of like in the back of our heads, like, is someone going to call the cops on us? Or is someone going to threaten our lives? Or are we going to be endangered by this? I think that that is also intensified when you think about, you know, just like the harshness of slavery. Black folks were put in direct conflict with the land. The land was an oppressor as much as white folks were.
we weren't able to practice ancestral traditions. There was a lot of trauma with the, transatlantic slave trade that we still experience today. And so, it's no wonder that like Black folks don't want to go out in the woods, or like we see the woods as like this force that could potentially oppress us, or we don't know what's out there, like what could harm us. And so it's a lot to carry, like to like see something and like be awestruck by its beauty and its majesty and its power, but also be like, this could harm me and this could hurt me in so many ways that I don't even know. And so I think about it kind of like in terms of that, especially also when I'm working with youth too. I haven't gone camping with any of my youth. Some of them want to, some of them are like, oh, hell no. Like, can we just like go to the park or something, So it's, it's definitely like something that is, I like Camille Dungy and like Kim Ruffin in conversation with each other, because I do think that I remember like also I was doing a workshop. This was when I was like living on the East Coast, and I met this woman from Georgia, and you hear Georgia, a Black woman, and you think so many things, in terms of Georgia, in terms of the South. And so I was like, we were doing a workshop on this poem, and she starts crying, and I was just like, oh my goodness, like what's wrong? And she's just like, just like my experience was just like so different. Like, yes, there was like that horror, but I lived in a predominantly Black like community. Like we played in the woods, like we like, like commune with like the wild turkeys, like, and for this to be the overwhelming perspective of like Black folks' experience with nature, she was pretty candid, and she was like, I think it's really harmful. And that experience really made me think differently as I was reading, older texts and thinking a lot about, Black relationships with nature. So
yeah, it's so good. I could talk to you forever. I mean, I studied architecture, right? And so
cool.
You'd have to draw these plans and such, and when you study different different structures, especially the structures that are in like the middle of nature, in the middle of nowhere. And to your point, I remember being in these spaces where I would imagine this beautiful house with all of these windows, because that's the only place that you can really, do something like that. And all of these windows bringing nature inside. When you think of Frank Lloyd Wright building and all of that stuff that's communing with nature. And then I get through all of that beauty and majesty, and I'm just like, yeah, but I could never live out there because they gonna run me out, or they, you know what I mean? And so it's like that, exactly what you're talking about, in the sense of like we want to be there, but then there's this fear that's always in the back of your mouth that's kind of giving that momentum or pushing you in that certain direction. There's a poem, and there's tons of poems that I've loved. No neutral zones, right? Now the first line, I got to the first line and I stopped, right? The first line was, at the playground, pretend is power. And I think because I read that right after reading some other BS that's happening in Florida, around education and the impact of how history is being recorded and or erased. Like when you think of, as an educator, as a storyteller, as a poet, what does that line sort of mean to you outside of just the exact of it?
Yeah, I mean, well, it was like from a direct experience. I think, again, only child, so like if anybody, like I didn't have like a big sibling or even like a younger sibling to like stick together with, like, it was me against all these other kids. So I knew how to like kind of like stick up for myself. And it was an exact experience of when I was like trying to like play, I think I was like playing like Little Mermaid or something, like as kids do, and someone was like, oh, well, like there aren't any Black folks, like, like in the Little Mermaid, or like there aren't like Black people here, so like you can't like be that character. And I was like, what? Like, but it's wild, like, as like kids also, in terms of like representation, like if they don't see Black folks, if they don't, and if, especially like non-Black kids, like if they don't see Black folks existing somewhere, like pretty much we don't exist, and so like thinking about like the really the imaginary of like in so many books, and again, as a bookworm, like in so many books, there weren't really Black folks, like Lord of the Rings, there aren't really Black folks. And I love fantasy, Harry Potter, there weren't really like many Black characters, like, Twilight, you know, like stuff like that. Like, and so I think about how like even then in the imagination, when you're building these fantasy worlds, when you're building these new worlds, Black folks don't exist, and how violent that concept is, even when it's not perceived as violent. I think of it as an act of erasure and an act of violence.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, I remember coming to this country, and I won't say how long ago, but I remember, you know, this is pre Harry Potter, pre all of that. I remember going in Brooklyn and telling people, yeah, I'm from England. And they're like, stop lying, dude. There's no Black people in England. Wait a minute. There's tons, you know, but
and the violence of telling you about your own experience and not recognizing that, you know.
Right. Because I not questioned whether or not there were Black people in England, because I knew there were, but I was like, but wait, it just makes you take a step back, and it's always that little extra step. And so how that's so built into our psyches is horrible. Now, how do you, are there poems? I know we're gonna get some time for you to read, but I got so many questions. Are there poems that you've done in the past that you wouldn't do today?
Oh, well, actually, okay, as I was like putting together the collection, there's one that I don't do, that I literally like last minute had the edited like final manuscript, and I was like, no, I'm not gonna put that one in there. And some of them are just like, I think a little more personal. There's some stuff that's like, I had to just like get out and write for myself that I thought was going to be in the collection that I took out, especially some stuff about like, you know, just like family and trauma. I took a really great class with Roxane Gay when I was in college, and it was called Writing Trauma. And I'm going to paraphrase what she said, because I can't remember exactly what she said, but she said like, remember that whatever you put on the page and whatever you put out there, you are responsible for. Yes. And that was really, really heavy, especially in terms of talking about like family stuff, in terms of, and I'm not saying that nobody, you know, like you should, you know, do what is most comfortable for you, but it was really important for me that like, yeah, I am responsible for that. Like and it was really great advice. Like, of course, you know, if it don't apply, let it fly. But it was really great advice for me. Like, if you would not feel comfortable, like talking to your family members about this, if you have not had these conversations, maybe that's what you need to do before, you know, putting it out there. And that was like a really, really important point for me. And also, especially to, I'm a young-ish writer, you know, I'm 26. And so like poems that I wrote when I was like 19, 20, 21, a lot of that stuff was like, I needed to just get out, you know, and like, that's like not stuff that like everybody needs to read.
Right,
you know?
right. Yeah.
So it's not even so much in terms of like a craft thing. There's so many ones that I'm just like, oh, I just don't like the way that I did this, or this needs more work, or like, I don't know if I'm like happy with like how I like crafted that one. And then there's some that I'm just kind of like, yeah, this is more of a conversation that I need to have with cousin, or this is more like something that I just needed to write for me.
Yeah, no, I get that. We're gonna, next time we get you on the show, we're gonna have to do this whole thing on just slam trauma poetry. Oh.
And then wanting you to tell everything. And I was like, I was literally just talking to someone who was on my team about that, because now that we're like a little older and we're reflecting on that, we were like, wow, what was that? Like, why did they put us through that?
I'm saying, but okay. We'll talk about that next time. What's your favorite? Do you have a favorite poem that you've written?
A favorite poem? Yes, I do. You know, actually funny, it's changed now because I'm working on a new manuscript. I would say if it's from this manuscript, favorite poem was Life Cycle. Okay. It's one that I'm talking about a lot of intergenerational trauma, how sickness gets passed down, thinking about like migration from south to north and the poisoning that happens in factories, at risk of like, you know, basically, oh, you'll get a pension, will you live to see it, you know, kind of like situation. So that's my favorite one. But I'm a roller skater. And I recently, I love when I find these connections. You can kind of see me about to nerd out here. I love when I find these connections of like, I didn't realize that there was an animal called a skate, and it's a type of, it's closely related to stingray, but it's technically a type of fish. And so I did like a little funky poem about like roller skating and skate, and like, you know, a little bit of like lore and like kind of thinking about ocean deities and things like that. So that's like and I'm gonna read it today because it's my new favorite.
I love it. I love how when I read your work, there's so many pieces. How do I put this? It's almost like it's going to be a weird analogy, but let's say I write poems and they're scattered on the ground. You write like a magnet. It almost, you write something and it pulls all those pieces up and sort of categorizes the title.
Thank you.
So yeah, no, I love that work. So no question there. Just wanted to give you your flowers on that. Do you have a favorite plant?
Favorite plants. Favorite plant. I would say first one that comes to mind is probably rosemary. Medicinal effects, very resilient, can kind of grow anywhere. And when it does, it proliferates and it just smells heavenly. I love when you walk by a rosemary bush and like you just, all you have to do is like barely touch it. You like rub your fingers and like you carry that scent with you for like the rest of your walk. It's like so cool.
Love it. Love it. What would you tell 13-year-old you?
Keep reading. Find folks who are interested in what you're saying. Like learn how to talk to folks, you know, because I think like I had so much in my brain that I just like, I was out again, gab, like, you know, like I was very much like talk without thinking. And I think that I've like learned a lot more. One thing that I've loved about getting older is just like learning a lot more nuance. Like, yes, we know that this is built on stolen land. We know X, Y, and Z, but being able to talk a little bit more like concretely and being able to communicate to folks about like what that means instead of just being like, this is bad. Like, you know, being, someone said this, actually one of my friends said this that I love, being more curious than critical.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I mean, you touched on it when you talked about talking to kids. It's like this, you know, there's the idea of talking to them about and educating them, but when they actually go out and feel and touch and all of that, it's a whole different experience that they can relate to. All right, I got like one more question before we get you to go in, and I'm trying to figure out what question that is. I'll go with this one. What do you think about your writing? And I would say actual and performance, because sometimes they're separate. What do you think there is about it that resonates with your audiences?
I've never been asked this question before. That's a beautiful question. And also let me just say, like, I used to do a lot of book reviews and a lot of interviews. I feel like I've learned a lot of skills from you. So this has been like a really this has been really fruitful. It's been really cool to watch you work your craft, you know?
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Cause I mean, interviewing is a skill. Interviewing is a
I like to gab like you. So it's trust me, I got like 30 questions. So.
I think that like I feel like I speak to various audiences. I think that, you know, one thing that I've actually like noticed is that, and I think maybe also some of the spaces that I've been into maybe is what kind of compels this, but a lot of like white hippies really like my writing, which I was not foreseeing, because I mean, like, to be perfectly honest, I don't really write with that audience in mind. But it was fascinating to me because people come up to me like, and they're a little older, you know, and so they're like, oh, I learned so much. Like, you're very like, I love the way you phrase things. So that's like really fascinating. And then I am kind of stepping into like cousin. I'm not quite auntie yet, but like, you know, like I'm kind of like cousin. And so like younger Black writers, like, you know, like college students, high school students, like they are like, oh, it's like really cool for them to see like, oh, there are like Black folks writing about the environment and nature and like stuff that I used to think was like nerdy or like uncool. Like, I think that that's really important. That visibility is really important. And then also I guess like more so answering the question of like what compels audiences, not so much audience themselves, is that I think that there's a little bit of something for everybody at work. You know, I mean, there's like the nature piece, there's the history piece, there's like the poetic creative side, there's the imaginative side. So there's a little something for everybody, you know.
Don't forget the truth side.
And the truth side.
Right. People, whether they know it or not, are going to be attracted to integrity. Right? Integrity in your work. So that's always going to attract. All right, I'm going to stop asking you questions and let you read from your wonderful, wonderful piece of work here. And we're going to get, so after you finish, a couple of more questions and such, but this has been fantastic, but I will pass it over to you to take us through.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All right. So yes, this is my book, Heirloom. I'm mostly going to be reading from this collection, and then I have a couple of poems that aren't in Heirloom that I'll also be reading this morning as well. So the first one that I'll actually read is the one we were talking about, no neutral zones. And it is, well, you'll see, it's about, what happens at the playground when kids, do what they do. So. At the playground, pretend is power. Children build brave new worlds from dirt and air, the alchemy of self learned through the unspoken hierarchy of the jungle gym. During the solstice, drought precluded imagination. Everyone so eager to cool off. Shoes became sticky with permissible color from melting paletas. So I, careless enough to sweat out a press and curl to pursue pleasure elsewhere, lent my hues to a make-believe apparatus. In the dry grass, they wrote me out of their fantasy realms. At the edge of paradise, there are no Black folks. I could be a slave, but not a mermaid, a mule, but not a dragon. My hands so bruised, the darkness blends the edges of my history. We raced to the treetops, skin knees straddling heaven, while the king of conifers lectured me on the historical inaccuracies of my existence. Below, a polyester flower memorial stunk of piss and neglect, synthetic tributes to the sad-eyed boy ended by a stray bullet, a painful reminder that they too were encroaching on grief-stricken land. I cried as the nearby HOA kids hung from the branches, snapping bark from ancient trunks as their parents made plans to uproot. The trees near the baseball field weren't just overgrown wood gyms, but my cousins, though this relation was too fantastic to comprehend. Meanwhile, the bars and the apartment across the street reminded my bones what it means to be rusted. Once, a young boy pulled a box braid from my hair, joked that if he planted it, would a nigger sprout up from the soil? I laughed it off as I do most hurt, more worried about the unfurling of my grandmother's artistry by white hands, the same way an apathetic nurse smudged the letters on her birth certificate, effectively erasing her first honor, a name. The park, the neighborhood have both been remodeled. Like most, we had to sell to survive. Everything changed but the trees. The plastic roses in my grandmother's house are gathering dust now, forever trapped in bloom. Maybe it would be better to have planted something that at least knew death as release. The trees are losing their needles. They too are parched. All right, this next one that I will read, thank you, is, see if I can find it, running. So I was talking a lot about, again, this beauty and burden paradox that Kimberly Ruffin, it's one of my favorite concepts out there. And then, of course, during kind of like the height of the pandemic, when everybody was seeking refuge outside and enjoying being outside, we were reminded about, again, how dangerous white vigilantism is with the murder of Ahmaud Arbery as he was running. And so this is a poem for him, and it's entitled Running. Once again, I return to the outdoors in search of cleaner breath. My lungs, a peripatetic duo foraging for whatever fills, collapses, or relieves. In the South, breath is heavy. Humid palpitations mark this flesh ripe for taking. This exhalation is not cheap. The flight in these legs, a vestigial burden passed down generations of restlessness. We stay moving. It is harder to kill a thing in constant motion. I say no names for fear I will summon something wicked. I do not look at what hunts me. Rather, I embrace the freedom of exodus. When one of us runs, the rest follow. It is an unspoken bond of reluctant prey. You would think with everyone trapped in their houses, the predators would take a break. Even Jesus got one day of rest. 2 bullets hunt and run behind me. The asphalt loves this body too much for return. Whiteness rewrites my breath into blood, into ash. Self-deputized by whatever golden emanations they deem worthy of judgment, these violent beasts reclaim open space that was never theirs to covet. My feet shift with the sole desire to mind my business and keep it pushing. My heart, a rustle in the wilderness sought for horrific consumption. I do not want to be surveilled. I just want to feel the cool air wrapped around my Black body and for once, feel free to exhale. Thank you. This next poem I'm going to read. So a lot of my poems in this collection are inspired by quotes by Black historians, farmers, creatives, ecologists. And this one is inspired by a George Washington Carver quote. And it said, and he said, "Weeds are flowers." And I just love that so much because oftentimes we think of weeds as something that we have to like expel from our garden, but a lot of them are actually very helpful for like, you know, soil health, for repelling like pests and things. And a lot of them are flowering plants and they produce, you know, pretty flowers. And so this poem is called "In the Thicket." It also borrows some idea, or like I guess like some concepts is more accurate, from Brer Rabbit and the Tar Baby. It's that tale. Oh, and another little bit of background as well. So my mom's side of the family is from Mississippi, and we have like this piece of property that like nobody has really been monitoring, and there's like this white guy who lives next door to it, and he like every time we go back, he like slowly inches his fence over on the property because nobody's watching it. So, you know, so this is, that's a little bit of context for this poem. In white imagination, Black folks exist as entertainers or boogeymen. Like my grandmother, I wish to make a mean life of both Tar Baby and Briar Patch. At once the same, occasionally one or the other. Somewhere between fascination and fetishization lies the shapeshifter's gift. Girl boy speaks their fragmented speech, and the chatter of gulls knocked clean from sky echoes. Someone once said I needed to culture my tongue, so I turned to the wisdom of evening bats, erudite in their echolocation. My mouth twists in praise-laden mimicry of another in-between species. Behind the loose bark of whatever forest remains, or sheltered by blackberry vine, its unwelcoming claws, a demarcation against encroachment. Weeds overtake Granny's plot long before a white man can move his fence a few inches every summer. Prickly bodies hide man-made borders. We are, after all, connected by our bitter-rooted histories. The same strange flower emerging year after year from bulbs of empire, poisonous with their long memories. Some things are just Black folks' business, the rest a fable. All right, this next one I'll read is, the backstory behind this poem is, Lordy, where is it? There it is. The backstory behind this poem is I think it was maybe like 2019. No, it was 2020. And there was another mass shooting in a Walmart, and this Black guy, he was in tank top, do-rag chain, and he was like an off-duty military guy, and he was responsible for getting a lot of folks out and safe out of that situation. But of course, when they were like for us, like it is some of like the most magical like shit that I have ever seen. And I am also fascinated by do-rags and like what it protects, how people style it, the colors, the embroidery, all magic, truly magic swag. And so this is a poem about do-rags. Forward moving, we always turn back time. Like ocean built of body, memory, the God of good grease paints follicles holy in those waves. Lord, those ancient waves facilitate a brother's boldest baptism. Wipe me down, a litany of all the good that came to stay. The Atlantic remembers every part of Black anatomy. Like a curse, a calling, those cold waters shift and stagnate under a cotton polyester blend. They never got to lay claim to the water, but by God, how they dammed, privatized, seized, overfished, extracted, deregulated, poisoned, commodified, pulled the cloth from the crease quick like a run in a stocking, ripped the color clean from scalp. An instantaneous divide reminds what can be taken and what can be absolved. Later, a Black boy will fit his mouth around the word rage, hold it behind his tongue, ferment his brooding into savagery. Watch him pull bones from the riverbed, casting wide mesh, drenched in cotton coagulations. Pray for summer rain to rinse all these trifling transgressions clean. Any flood breaks a bullet's back, but does not siphon the blood back into body. Baby, I can't help but enshrine you as a vengeful sea god, drowning in all that drip, all that wet, all that sheen. All right. Okay. I think I will move now into like my favorite poem in the collection, Life Cycle, the one that I mentioned earlier. And a little bit of context, I like to give this preface. So my auntie Janice, first off, like badass supreme. Like this lady, like she's like 80 years old. She's like fighting cancer. She looks good while doing it, you know, like, and so she's just a dope human being. But she worked in the Ford factories. A lot of my family did, you know, like in Detroit. That's where we moved from like Mississippi to Detroit. So they worked in the Ford factories. And the assembly line that she was on, she told me the story that when a lot of people would get cancer, you know, different types of cancer based on like the chemicals that they were working around. People would come back, you know, they get cancer, they get treatment and they'd be in remission. If they came back to work, it wouldn't be 2 years before the cancer came back. And so I think about this, you know, and the choices that Black folks were forced to make, fleeing racial terror in the South to come work in these factories with no like work protections, no like sort of like provisions, all just, you know, from fleeing, you know, like this racial violence and persecution in the South, and then like what meets you, you know, in the North. So that's what this poem is about. America is a factory. My father builds security cameras from discarded junk phones, their cracked screens, a subterranean stained glass burgeoning blessings. Come one, come all if you dare. He welds a fine line between surveillance and security. My father is no stranger to a gun. My father believes in a self-proclaimed rapture. The hills have eyes. My father's lenses thicken as his vision defers. At the end of the world, he hopes to patent his despair. America is a landfill. Underwater bloodline brined, it's soured. My neighbor pours the leftover liquid from a pot of greens into his garden. Billowing green stink arises, stains room for ripening. Black folks despise waste. The last drops of crown peach in the dog's water bowl for taste. The plastic bags under my auntie's kitchen cabinet, exceptional cushioning for our endangered shadows. Never afforded the softness of packing peanuts. Is the soul biodegradable? Can it be upcycled? At least we still have Granny's house. Wrap your apparitions in polyester coves, send them out to ocean. May they forever exist in sedimentary purgatory, floating on. In this sense, we never rest. In this sense, pollution profits. And won't these white folks come and pick up the damn trash? America is a false idol. All my people iconoclasts. Look out the window at all that. Goddamn, what is he protecting? Ain't nothing here ours but scraps of metal melted all down, why don't you? Some homes are worth less than their copper pipes. This metallic stew pot boiling over. My ancestors bartered gold teeth for green, earned heart disease and curdled cream dreams instead as the planet warms another degree. Mama says my degree won't save me. Suppose cash really does rule everything around me. I wonder, what rich bones can broth a new vanguard? Can a nigga get a witness? America is a malignant tumor. Oh, how I long to capitalize this collective heart, intrusion in our collective heartbeat, beating away at the floorboards of good senses until the spirits rattle around pushing daisies, memory stinging nettle unsilenced. Watch the good earth reclaim clunkers for cash. Nostalgia makes a mockery of present. The open-faced sores on my uncle's knuckles, a tribute to this nation's success. I won't bullshit you. He reeks of burnt sienna and ember. It all reeks of pyrated pyrite, fool's gold. I talk too much about my grandmother's hands because they threshed this country. Great migration granny, built Ford tough. A gorgeous ghost gnarled into graphics. Look closely. You can see flakes of calluses soldered to your car's lithium battery. I talk too much about my grandmother's hands because they became cracked by bleach, ammonia, everything meant to whiten and purge bacteria. She passed down her genealogy of anguish, lead-hardened blood, black lung coughing up embattled blues. Wasn't the Tin Man once chopping through scorched earth too? My gut is filled with vengeful microorganisms. Today and every day beyond grief, I throw my grease against any surface in need of shine. America, define yourself a country exactly. My offering, a knotted bellyache of sadness born beyond a destined horizon, manifested. The embers of our lost selves tumbling across the West Coast. Even the mountains seem to collapse with sadness. The spine of the uninherited earth curved like that of a funeral wailer, an assembly line aggravating access. All that rust corroding our good sense. Riddle me this. How can I be well when my lawn is always burning? All right. How much more time do I have, Tshaka?
Let's say you can do another two.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Thank you. The second to last one I will do. Oh, I haven't decided yet. Let's see. I'm gonna do. Where are we? All right, I want to do one that's like a little bit more like funny and like happy, a little break from a lot of the like intense racial trauma. This one is called Accessing Excess. Again, I talked about how I love the way that Black folks like self-express, how, just like we always look good. We always look good and we smell good, like Sunday, like going to church, like the church ladies in their hats, like the dashikis. I was just at like the Black Arts Festival in Denver, and like, just all the different modes of self-expression for Black folks is so, so cool. And so this is like a little love letter to that. God damn, baby, you looking so fresh to death. What you finna do? Where you going with all that gas? Illustrious, immaculate, Black, ooh-wee. Nigga, I'm trying to get like you. Sew a whole seance to my gown and retrieve forgotten gossip in silk and sateen of biblical proportions. Oh, my gorgeous, glittering gods of good looks all grown. I mean, have you ever tasted sweetness from the source? It's almost enough to make a nigga hop a flight and go back to where loves him best. Niggas doo-wopping a silk press. Aloe dipped lock, creases so sharp, starch to a soldier's salute. Return to a mouth of embodied pleasure. An adornment ordained by centuries of hand-me-down joy, but bitch, soon as that stimmy hit, I drown myself in debauchery. Look quick. I'm a bead on Serena's hair at the 1998 US Open. I'm the gold in your granny's teeth. I'm Smino's Opal Grill smoking Swisher Sweets. I'm decadence for the sake of decadence alone. Yes, me and my niggas be ungovernable, unquenchable, over the top, extra, indulgent, reinventing beauty one berry-stained thread at a time. Our wayward fantasies too grandiose to ever be appreciated by the colonial machine of our scarcity myth nightmares. Lord, look how we glow even in our grief. Baby, you can't clock this crease. Never doubt a nigga and a paycheck. A nigga in an advent speaking all that is gaudy and sensual and demanding. I am here. I am aching to be seen. True, I am extravagant, but doesn't Earth Mother drench herself in new color every season too? New shades pulled from a legacy of green glamour. Dare say my feet ain't planted somewhere. Like I ain't a product of transfer, transmutation, ecological restructuring. Like I don't pray with the same hands I fold my garments with. I am throttling the life out of miracles as I wring pain from a wet cloth. Watch as I stretch culture beyond erosion. I'ma keep my fabrics, I've earned my keep. Could teach you more about sustainability than you could ever sermonize. Cut from a different cloth so I be holding good flesh, just yearning to be free. All right. I love performing that one. That one's so fun. I love the musicality of that one. It's just like, it reminds me of, I kind of like stepped a little bit into like my Issa Rae kind of like rap bag. So All right, this last one, again, very much poems inspired by Black historical figures, activists, ecologists, and this one has an epigraph from Fannie Lou Hamer, who is one of my favorite ancestors, and Freedom Farm and her work, both in terms of voting, but also in terms of Black self-determination and cooperative economics, is very inspirational to me. And yeah, she really did that. So rest in power, Miss Fannie. And the epigraph goes, I keep a shotgun in every corner of my bedroom, and the first cracker even looks like he wants to throw some dynamite on my porch, won't write his mama again. I keep a piece of myself on the porch. Don't test me. I have had everything ripped from my flesh and still fix my gums to smile at those who wish me harm. Don't try it. I am a nigga who comes from niggas, and as such, I do not play. This body owns nothing, exists everywhere. You can't kill me. All the fullness in the world collides within my frame. A grand unraveling renders me mighty vengeful. Can you say the same? My love shatters anything that has tried to cause me harm. Ceremony predates survival, so leave my flowers at the doorstep and dance until your heart bursts into 1,000 new iterations of godliness. Fill my cup with lilac wine where one can pull a Nina croon through the window until a swan song of rage fills the walls and covers me in honeysuckle rose. Give me all that I desire or nothing at all. I want a new wig. I want a plot of land. I want a small wind that carries me through the rest of forever. I am owed at least that. Thank you for listening.
Oh, no, thank you for sharing that. I mean, that's just a touch into your work, and I'm just so drawn into all of it. So thank you for sharing all that with us. There are I just want to make sure I get any questions from the audience. I know Sandra has a question here that says, what does the struggle for white acceptance do for identity and redirected rage?
Mm-hmm. Yo, that's not something that I think about a lot, in terms of, especially also in terms of like audience. When I was younger, I think also growing up in Denver, my mom made sure that I was surrounded by a lot of Black elders, but honestly, I didn't grow up with a lot of like Black folks who were my age, unless they were like family, just in terms of like demographics and the schools that I was in. And so I felt like a lot of my youth was spent being like, why don't you care about this? Because that's who I was surrounded by,
Right.
I was like, why don't you care about this? Because that would show me that you care about me. Now that I'm older and a lot more of my friends are Black and, and people of color and folks that I've been building and organizing with, I recognize that, like, not that it was a waste of time, but like sometimes I mourn the childhood and the youth that I could have had if I was like surrounded by folks and we were kind of like building together outside of sort of this gaze. I didn't realize, like, when I was in high school, what I was really asking for was acceptance, an acceptance that I never was really going to achieve. And so now that, like, I'm older, I feel so much more weight off of myself now that I am surrounded by people who I know I care, who are organizing, who I can learn from. And then I also, and sometimes when I see, especially like in terms of like, like the political theater, or in terms of like, even just like sometimes one of the reasons that I wrote that poem, like, some things are Black folks' business, the rest a fable. What I mean by that is just like, some stuff like we can keep for ourselves. We don't have to keep asking like, will you accept this? Will you like consider this important? Will you do this and that? That's just extra. Toni Morrison says something really great that was like, the purpose of racism is to kind of keep you in a state of constant distraction. You're constantly answering questions. You're constantly like answering and explaining to yourself. Meanwhile, like your neighborhood's getting gentrified. Meanwhile, like, like your resources are being pilfered. And so I think having like a redirective focus has been, it's hard work, but it's been very liberating for me.
That's incredible. I mean, there's so many things you touched there, and it's just as a parent of a 13-year-old girl, right? Before you even talk about anything else, it's just this maneuvering through this idea of wanting acceptance, and as a parent trying to figure out how to manage that conversation, but give enough room to do what you've done, right? Get to that space and then say, okay, I get it now. I don't need that. But yeah, so important. Thank you for the question, Sandra. I do have just a couple more for you, and guys, if you have questions, put it in the chat. But what was when you put this book together? Was there any aha moment you had while putting this work together?
That's a good question. I think that so the poem that I read, the one that ends with some things are Black folks' business, the rest are fable, that was actually one of the last poems that I wrote. And for me, it kind of honestly, that one and then another one, Nature Documentary, it sums up a lot of what I was trying to think about and convey in this collection, which was I'm tired of explaining. Some things I'm just gonna have to let be. Yeah. And some things that I'm just gonna have to let rock, let sit, let marinate. And again, Toni Morrison is a big inspiration of mine, and I love just the way that she speaks, her writing. Even though I'm not much of a fiction writer, I do take a lot of inspiration from the way that she does world building. Right. And I'm gonna paraphrase. I don't know if I know it exactly, but she's I didn't ask to recenter. I didn't ask the people to recenter or whatever. I stood at the margin and I let people meet me where I was at. Yeah. And that was kind of I was thinking of that as I was writing that poem, and that was kind of the aha. I don't have to keep kind of constantly trying to pull it out of people. I can just I can let the words be what they are, and then you can meet me over here, and we can have a cup of tea, and we can kiki.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like perfume, right? You're just gonna spray it in the air, and then I'll just walk through it. I'm gonna walk through it while it's there, and we're good. Sandra also has a follow-up question to what I was saying, is just in terms of what changes do you feel as you externalized the work, as you put that work out there?
Yeah, I think honestly, I felt a lot more grace for some of my older family members and the things that they went through. I did a lot of oral history and conversations with them as I was writing. And I mean, I think especially a lot of we don't even know, unless, maybe that's an unfair generalization, but a lot of us don't really know what our parents went through and what our ancestors went through. We can think of it kind of abstractly, but when you're in the grocery store and your auntie tells you some of the most traumatizing piece of lore that you've heard, and you're just and then she keeps looking for canned corn, it's what do you do with that, right? Oh my God, yeah. But it's also I don't know, it's also what is the word I'm looking for? It's heartwarming to know that she finally feels comfortable sharing that with you, and that you're at a stage in which you can kind of appreciate oh yeah, this is kind of why you are the way that you are right now. And so I think that this book was really helpful in thinking, and also thinking, even extending that beyond my family. I think I have again, come correct, but I have a lot more grace with folks now, in my everyday life, because a lot of times they just keep all that in, all the terror that they experience, all of the the horrors, they don't regularly talk about that, and they grew up in a culture where you don't share that, and you just kind of keep pushing. But then again, it comes out in different ways, so I have a little bit more grace.
Absolutely. So thank you for that. So you're okay, I'm gonna go to this one first. If your book Heirloom was an actor or a singer, who would it be?
Oh my gosh, that's an amazing question. Okay, I think I'm gonna answer both. Okay, actor, Angela Bassett, for sure. Just the way that she emotes and embodies. And I think that there is also I love Angela Bassett's rage acting, when she's fed up and she's mad, that it does something to you. And this is a book in which I was really fed up and mad, and so I think that that would align very well.
I love it.
In terms of singer, that's a good question. In terms of singer, the first one that immediately comes to mind is Tina Turner. Just because, so animated and so expressive, extremely talented, powerful, voice, powerful performer. Yeah.
Yeah, I see that. I so see that. But all right, so you're stuck in an elevator, right, for an hour. And you can be stuck in that elevator with any three people, living or dead. for an hour, who would those three people be?
For an hour, living or dead? June Jordan.
Okay.
She can fill space, or was able very well to fill space and to make you think about things sometimes you don't want to think about, but you need to think about. Probably like Snoop Dogg, because I know that he's gonna have like weed on hand and we can just kind of like chill a little bit, you know.
My hat fell off of that one.
And then probably my best friend, because they are like both of us are like very like, we like don't take, like when we get together we don't take shit serious, and like it's just like giggles and goof, you know. And so I think like, especially like in an elevator, I'm not claustrophobic, but I do get like, don't touch, like if we're in too close of quarters, I'm like, don't touch me. And like they're like a very good like calming force, and like they can bring like the humor and like the silly, the absurdity of like the situation.
That's hilarious. I love the way that you answered it, and it's so different. When I ask that question, folks are going, oh wow, you know, I'll bring back, I don't know, it's like someone like history of their come, and it's but it's great. And now I'm going to investigate that myself, because I wonder if it's an age thing or whatever. But beautiful answer. I got one more question for you, and then we're going to go into maybe two more questions. Then we're going to go into what I call my quick fire. So what does your family think about your writing?
My family, you know, at first my mom didn't really understand it. My mom's not big on poetry. She is definitely much more like analytical, like scientist, kind of like math brain. And so she supports it. Like she, like whenever I'm in Denver, she's in the audience for every show. Like she's always like cheering me on. But like she has told me many a time, like I don't get it. Like, love you, I appreciate you. Like some stuff I just don't get you, or you're just gonna have to break this down for me. You're gonna have to explain it to me, which I think is like really cute. So always has been like kind of like supportive. Well, actually, like recently, so like has been like pretty supportive of it. I think like a lot of my upbringing was like, find a job that pays good money. Like,
of course, yes.
And so like when I was doing like poetry at first was kind of like a distraction from that. But then I like think once I started like being like successful in it, like she was like, oh, okay, yeah, all right, I see you doing you. And like I think it also like showed her a side of me that was like a little bit more like, when I put my mind to something, I'm gonna make it happen, you know. So like, and I think that was like really cool for her to see as a parent. In terms of extended family, is actually really sweet. My auntie Janice, she's so sweet. She was like, ooh, like she left me a voice message. She's like, oh, you like a little James Baldwin, and like she was like, I read your like book like 3 times back to front, and it was really sweet. And my family has been really supportive. That's been really nice.
Oh, that's fantastic. Do you have a like an interesting writing quirk? Like I know some folks have to write with a certain pen, or they have to be in a certain space. Do you have any quirks?
I feel like sometimes a lot of people are always like, and my partner sometimes gets on me on this, is like, oh, like you're on your phone a lot. It's like, no, like if I don't write it down, I will forget it.
Yes.
So like I like, sorry if I stop like mid conversation. I just have to like, because I've done it before where like, you know, you're falling asleep, you have this line in your head and I'm like, I'll remember it in the morning, and then it's gone and you can't like access it. So I'm like, now I know, like if I even if I'm dreaming, I'll wake up, write something down. If I'm cooking, pause, wash my hand, write something down, you know, because I need to like make sure that I get it down.
That is so true. You know how many missed poems, how many lost poems I've had because of that, to the point now I just take pictures. If there's something, I'm just like, oh, take a picture, I'll come back to it later on. I also just don't have the time to sit down and write anymore, because you know, times have changed. What else do I have for you before we get to quick line? Are there any, oh no, this one. And this is for me and anyone else listening. For new writers that are out there that want to embark on writing their passions, writing, you know, things they believe in, how would you recommend, how would you suggest, advise them to overcome doubt?
Yeah, I think that's something that I'm still struggling with. I have like, I think, well, my doubt manifests a little bit differently because I think, like, especially in the era of like social media, Instagram, TikTok, like, especially a lot of writers who are more independent and marginalized, like, we have to like self-market. And I'm like, nobody's gonna care about this. Like, why am I like, like, why am I sharing this? Like, but I'll do it. I'll just go ahead and do it because like that's what you got to do. And I wonder if that's like horrible advice, but you just like do it. Like, like,
no, it's right advice.
Like sometimes you just gotta just like do it. And like just like if you get like 3 likes on your post, okay, go take yourself out for some ice cream, move on, like, and I think having like a tough skin is hard, especially if you're like a soft soul. I'm not like, so like I'm pretty resilient. I got like thick skin, like I can sit, I can like take critiques. Again, my favorite thing that my auntie says is if it don't apply, let it fly. Like, like if you feel like something's wrong, then like just like kind of like let it go. But I think that just like being able to like just do it, and then also like once you do the thing, put your phone away, like step away from it. Like just do it and don't dwell on it. Go take yourself for a walk, get an ice cream, talk to a friend. I also say like having a writing community of people who value your work. This is one of the reasons why I think that I never did an MFA, so I can only speak like like from what my friends have spoken about, is that sometimes that's why MFAs can be so hard, because people they're there for them, like they're there to better their writing. And some people are there to like develop community, but I think in a space like that, when you're getting graded, when you're getting like critiqued all the time, it can be sometimes hard to build up that community and for someone to like take the time to know your work. I am very blessed that I have people in my circle that I can be like, hey, can you take a look at this poem? Hey, can you like send me edits? And I trust their judgment. Like if they say something that's like, oh, I don't like this line, I'm not going to take that as like they're just being petty or they're just being
right. You're not going to question it, right? Where's this coming from actually? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, that's so dope. That's so important. And everyone listening to this later on, please, you're getting jewels here. Like, listen. Joseph has who's listening now has a question for you. He's an incredible artist, rapper, poet.
I remember Joseph. Hey, good to see you.
There you go. He says, as an academic, do you find you write poems like a musician, as in your performance? Because he says he loves the way your flow.
Thank you. I don't think I do anymore. I used to, but I think that I have a lot of musical influences. So I play piano. I used to compose music. I kind of took a little bit of a break from it, but I've like composed poems to music, kind of like interludes and stuff. And I think that like I'm always of that brain, like as I'm writing. And then I also like perform it kind of like for myself. Like I do a lot of reading out loud, and that helps me with like rhythm and flow. Like some stuff I'm like, oh, I don't like how that flows, or like that isn't at the cadence that I want it at. And that helps. It helps a lot with like the editing too. I also love, I love musicians, especially lyricists. Like I love like the music, but also like when they are in conversation with each other, that to me is like the pinnacle of like true artistry. So I listen to like a lot of Stevie Wonder. I love Smino. I love Caliuchis. I love Isley Brothers, like Earth, Wind and Fire, contemporary rappers, a lot of folks like that, so I think a lot of it more is kind of like in terms of influence rather than like like I set out to do it.
We can't help it. So that's just what comes with who we are. All right, well, we have a couple minutes left. I'm gonna go into what I call my quick fire round, and basically what I'm going to say a word. And I would love for you to respond with the first thing that comes to your mind, like no thinking, just straight, whatever comes to your mind.
Got it.
All right, here we go. Poetry.
Possibility.
Language.
Difficult.
Sun Ra.
Psychedelic.
Tell me about it, sorry. Woman.
Empowered.
Black woman.
Empowered.
Griot.
Grief.
Soil.
Soulful.
Creativity.
Continual.
Denver.
Power.
Church.
Old.
Smiles.
Sad.
Meditation.
Meaningful.
Black hair.
Capacious.
Slam poetry.
Silly.
Pain.
Progress.
Ocean.
Joy.
Religion.
Root.
Queer.
Expansive.
Hip hop.
Honey.
Jazz.
Honeyed.
Ego.
Trippin'.
Earth.
Wind.
Kiss.
Sweet.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
That was fun.
This has been absolutely amazing. We got to go grab coffee and talk. I got so much to do about. And truth be told, I have a little confession here. So I heard about your work, right? And heard who you were. And then, because I forgot to do this, to give you flowers for Moab, right?
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely. Because I had also submitted for the fellowship. And then when it came out, I remember seeing the email and I was like, oh my God. Because it was one of those things where it was like, I had so much stuff going on. Like I wanted it, but I was like, oh, but if it comes, da da da. Anyway, I went through and then I saw your name and I was like, okay, this is dope. And so then I started digging, as we do. And everything that I flowered, everything that I opened up, I was like, this art that I love, this creation that I love is in such good hands. And I appreciate you. I appreciate the work you put in. I appreciate the way that you nurture and you handle this craft. And then when you partner that then with the environment and the very place we rest our feet on or walk on, just adds a whole nother dimension to what you do and the importance of what you do. So again, I wanted to end the show by just giving you your flowers, thanking you for what you're doing for this craft and what you're doing for my little girl.
Thank you.
Setting space for her as she's moving into this world. So again, yes, thanks for coming on. Everyone who's listening, thank you for joining, spending your time to be with us today. And for folks that will look at this later on, you should have been here live, but you get the juice anyway. So talk to you soon. Thanks again so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.